Hey everybody, it's time for another full spectrum preparedness video. This time we're going to be talking about security. Now this isn't going to be one of those nuts and bolts videos where we talk about what we can do in our everyday life to make ourselves more secure. We're going to look at it from a macro standpoint so we can build a framework for security on our property. Stick around. Hey everybody, welcome back to Grampy Acres. Like I said, it's time for another video on full spectrum preparedness, full spectrum homesteading. This time we're going to talk about security. Now, as a reminder, these big topics about the fundamentals of full spectrum preparedness are a large overview on preparedness as a whole. And what we're doing with this series that's going on right now is we're looking at it from a very high level, and we're building a framework so that we can start putting the little bits and pieces, those nuts and bolts that I keep talking about, into place. So this video is going to be about security, and we're gonna talk about some stuff that people don't think of a lot whenever they're looking at properties or they're evaluating where they live. And as I've said before, the information that we're using here came from a tool that a friend of mine and I built for Yoda whenever she was a real estate agent, so that she could quantify properties on a preparedness level. So let's get started. First thing we want to look at when we're considering security on our property from the macro level is location, location, location. And it's true in real estate, it's true in security. Some of the concerns we have about location when we're looking at our property are different with the different fundamentals. For instance, if you remember when we were talking about food, one of our major concerns was how close were we to supermarkets? How close were we to someplace where we could buy food or we could get food? When it comes to security, we want to flip that around. And the further away you are from certain things, the better off you are, up to a point. So the first thing we're going to look at is environmental. And when I say environmental, I'm not talking about the weather or anything like that. I'm talking about our distance from big masses of people. So if you live over 350 miles away from a metropolitan area with over 1 million people in it, you're doing pretty good. You know, a lot of security for remote bug out locations or remote homesteads are out of sight, out of mind. And the further away we get from these large population concentrations, the better off we are. You know, it's kind of hard unless you're living out in the Southwest and in the Rocky Mountains to get 350 miles away from a metropolitan area over 1 million people, but it can be done. So then we want to go the next step down. Are we over 20 miles from a city with a population of over 20,000? The numbers that we came up with for these population centers are just arbitrary. They may differ from what you think. And if you've got different numbers, you got a certain feeling about this, go ahead and put it in the comments down below. But so we want to go over 20 miles away from a city with a population of over 20,000. We want to be 10 miles away from a town or a village with a population of over 5,000. And the reason why the 5,000 number stuck was because, at least in rural America, if you've got 5,000 people in a town, you've got all the modern conveniences. You've got grocery stores, probably multiple grocery stores. You've got medical. You've got a police presence. You know, we've got law enforcement. It helps. It helps alleviate some of the stresses of being far away from urban areas and not having access to those modern conveniences. The next thing we want to look at is, are we over 10 miles away from a 4-lane or greater highway? Now, the reason why the conversation about roads is important is because they act as avenues of approach, and they allow people to get from these large population centers out away from them. And we want to be as far away as we can get from a major highway as possible for 2 reasons. Number one, in the event that something bad happens, there's going to be a mass exodus out of these cities. And they're going to flow out of the cities on these highways, and then they will stream off onto side roads. So we want to make it so it's as hard as possible for somebody to inadvertently find their way next to our property. The next reason is they give criminals that live in a big city the ability to come into a rural area very quickly and get out. And we want to minimize that as much as possible. Another concern with roads, are we over 5 miles away from a paved road? You'd be amazed at how much security a gravel road will afford you. So many people will not even think about getting off a paved road to go someplace if they don't have to. So we want to make that, and over 5 miles is a pretty good distance. I mean, there's going to be, if your area is like the rural areas that we've lived in, 5 miles puts quite a bit of distance between you and where somebody leaves the road. And quite frankly, there's going to be other properties between you and that road that are going to look more attractive to a criminal. Another thing we have to worry about when we're thinking about the environmental aspects of security is the proximity to either manufacturing or power generation. And the reason being, accidents happen. All we have to do is look at history, and we can see all kinds of evidence of this. Number one, Chernobyl, probably the biggest one. People that lived hundreds of miles away from Chernobyl to this day cannot live there because of the accident that happened with the nuclear reactor there. Manufacturing, Bhopal, India is a very good example of that. There was an industrial accident at one of the fertilizer plants, and it killed something like 20,000 people. And those people were 10, 15 miles away from these things. So we need to take a look at our proximity to manufacturing and power generation in that respect. Now, you might think at this point with environmental, we're going to talk about earthquake zones, our probabilities of tornadoes, hurricanes. Yes, there is concern there with the location of where you decide to build your house or buy a house at, but we're not gonna file that one underneath security, because that's more disaster preparedness. All right, we have to think about it, but it's not going to fall underneath this fundamental of security. So as I said, when we're talking about roads, they act as an avenue of approach for criminals. So that brings us to the next aspect of security as it falls underneath the full spectrum preparedness, crime protection. It's something that we have to discuss because no matter where you are, bad things are going to happen. There's going to be there's a criminal element every place in the country, every place in the world. There's a criminal element, and we want to be aware of what we're facing whenever we move on to a property or we buy a property. So we want to look at three things. There's three things here that we want to look at. Number one, we want to look at law enforcement officers per capita for where we live. Now, we live out in the county, so we're looking at state and sheriff's office. The small towns nearby, they've got their own police forces. That does come into play because if the law is being enforced in these towns, then that criminal activity will be curtailed and it won't overflow into the rural areas as much. Next thing we want to look at is violent crime stats, murder, rape, assaults, things like that. We want to know how violent people are in this area. And then the third thing is property crime stats. Now, violent crime stats, you can get on state websites and look it up, or you can look at the police blotter and for your local community, and a lot of newspapers still print those. But you can see the violent crimes trends there. Property crimes, I'll tell you a good source of information on property crime trends is your insurance agent. Find the local insurance agent and get into a conversation with him and ask him about property crime or property claims, vandalism, theft, things like that, because they will have a good handle on how prevalent it is in your area. All right. We've talked about crime. Now let's talk about fire protection. And we had this come into focus for us when we had our Coop fire last year. it is really important. And there's three aspects here that we want to look at. Number one, are we within 5 miles of a fire department? Now, the reason why we use 5 miles as the limit, because for insurance purposes, that's where insurance companies draw the line and they start changing rates. So, and they do that for a reason, because there's more chance of something going completely bad, getting completely destroyed if a fire happens outside that 5 mile radius of a police department. Now, we're serviced by a volunteer fire department, so you need to know if your fire department is a fully manned one or if it's a volunteer one. Either way, we want to know where we are in relationship to that fire department, because that's going to dictate how much firefighting capability we have to incorporate onto our property. The next thing we want to talk about with fire protection is the dwelling itself, the buildings itself. Number one, is the roof non-flammable? Is it tile or metal roof where it's non-flammable? And the dwelling itself, is it fire resistant? Is it made out of concrete? Does it have asbestos shingling on it? We want to look at that overall picture of the property and the dwellings and the buildings on the property, so that we can understand what our vulnerabilities are. The next thing we got to do, and this is something that we do in permaculture, we want to know where our fire threats are from. We live in an area where brush fires are prone to happening, and we need to know where the prevailing winds are coming from, and we need to know where there's going to be potential fires. Just last week, somebody was burning a field off about a mile from here, and the whole area was covered in smoke. That fire could have very easily gotten out of control if it wasn't being watched and caused problems. So yes, that falls underneath the environmental aspect as well. We want to put it under fire protection in this case, because that's the prominent feature of that specific aspect. So we've talked about the larger macro things: environmental concerns, crime protection, fire protection. Now we're going to get down and evaluate the physical security of the property itself and the buildings and dwelling there on the property, in no particular order. Number one, is it fenced or gated? Goes a long way to providing protection and security for a place, because the largest deterrent for crime is physical presence. Fences and gates give that physical presence. The next thing we want to look at: lighting, outside lighting on the property. Again, criminals don't like light because it shows people what they're doing. They like coming in the darkness. So is there lighting? Well, we have to put lighting in. I mean, this is all stuff that costs money to do. So if it's already on a property where you're thinking about moving or you've moved to, then you don't have to worry about it, and it doesn't come out of your budget for all this other stuff. Next thing, is the home hardened? Now, when I say hardened, what I'm talking about, there are certain nuts and bolts things that you can do to increase the security in your house. 4-inch screws going through hinges and doorknobs into the frame of the house, through the door frame and into the studs, are much more secure than what people usually put on there, which is the 2.5, 3-inch screws. So have those screws been replaced? The next thing, window coverings. 3M makes a product that goes on a window, it's clear, but you can take a baseball bat and swing it on the window and it won't cave in. It takes 4 or 5 really good smacks with a bat to get through the glass. So is the glass protected? Is it thick glass? Do you have bulletproof glass anyplace? What's the building made out of? Concrete buildings are much more physically secure than wooden structures, because you don't sustain as much damage. You can't inadvertently have a round fired through the house. It doesn't burn as well. So these are all things. Whenever I'm talking about a hardened home, does it have a security system in it? That hardens a home. Another thing to think about: does it have a hidden room or a panic room? Yes, in the eventuality that something bad happens, do you have some place where you can retreat to and ride out bad guys being in your house? So we want to look at that. We want to, and can you have one? Is there room to build one if there's not one there? The next thing, a built-in safe, either a document safe or a gun safe, or preferably both. Is there a built-in safe? Because even if you've got a great big standalone safe, bad guys are very inventive and intuitive, and they can steal it. I've talked to people that have had safes just taken right out of their houses. I mentioned alarms just a second ago. What kind of alarm system? If you've got an alarm system, what kind of alarm system is it? Do you have a driveway alert so you know when somebody's coming on your property? If your house is a mile away from the road, you want to know whenever somebody comes through that gate and they're driving down your driveway. Even if even if you can see the gate from the house, you want something in there. So if you're not paying attention, that it goes off, and how's that alert system put into place? Is it tied into the grid? Is it like a Dakota alarm system where it's all done off of radio waves? Is it Wi-Fi? There's all kinds of different aspects of alarm systems that we need to take in consideration. The biggest one for this framework here is there one already in place? Because again, costs money to put one in. If we don't have to put one in, that's good. The next thing we want to talk about with physical security is the dwellings themselves, the big overarching view of the dwellings. Are all buildings on the site visible from the house? Can you see every single building from the house? Reason being, you want to be able to get eyeballs onto those buildings at some point and be able to look and see if something's happening. Next thing, where do the buildings sit in relationship to the road? In the summertime, can the buildings be seen from the road, or is it blocked by trees or a hill or something? In the wintertime, same thing. Can it be seen from the road during the winter? If you have deciduous trees along the front of the property that blocks the view in the summertime, are those trees going to lose their leaves in the winter? Ideally, the further away you can get from the road, the better, because it gives you more time to react if something should happen. Not always possible. The property that we're living on right now is a prime example of that. It's just it's one of the big drawbacks is we do sit relatively close to the road. If we can do anything to make it so either the summertime or the wintertime people can't see the house from the road, that's a big plus. Okay, that's what we came up with for the security fundamental of full spectrum preparedness. We talked about the environmental aspects of security from a full spectrum preparedness viewpoint. We talked about looking at crime protection, crime stats, and fire protection. How far are we from a fire department, or what's the building made of? And we talked about some of the different aspects and an overarching view of physical security. Some of the things that if they're not in place when we build the house or we buy a house, we're going to have to pay money to get those installed and taken care of. And we'll do videos down the road on how we can alleviate some of the concerns with these different aspects underneath security. But I hope that worked for you. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it educational, entertaining. If you did, go ahead and hit the thumbs up button. Hit the notification bell so you'll know next time that we roll out another full spectrum preparedness video, or Yoda does another cooking video, or we do talk about permaculture. Just give you a tour of the property. Hit that notification bell so you can get it. Most of all, guys, share this information out. Share the information you have. If there's anything that you think should be on this overarching framework for security fundamental for full spectrum preparedness, go ahead and put it in the comments down below. We want to hear from you, because we're learning from each other and all this. And by no means is this a complete and full list. There's all kinds of stuff that can go on here. For brevity's sake, we came up with these aspects of security. But you can add more. You can add it, make it your own. Share that information with other people by putting comment down below. Make a video for yourself. Do whatever. This framework is going to give us the ability to flesh out our preparedness stance when it comes to our property and our lives, and it's going to allow us to go pursue a life done free. All right, take care, folks. Thanks, Milo.